Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. This is a podcast where I read old books, sometimes fiction, sometimes non-fiction, in the most boring way I can, to try and help slow your spinning mind, enough for you to fall asleep in the most natural way possible. The stresses of life often follow us to bed and keep us company, but I'm here to distract you from them and help you drift away. Before you do fall asleep, if you find Sleepy Time Tales helpful and you'd like to support me to keep it going out to thousands of you and your fellow insomniacs, please consider signing up on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. If monthly is a bit much, you can also put a tip in the tip jar. Both of these are linked in the show notes. And now some shout outs on that topic. New patrons that have joined up since March are Emily, Christy, and Gwen. And also shout outs to folks who have thrown a little something in the Ko-Fi, William and Mary. Your support from all of you is very much appreciated, and thank you very much. Or if finances are tight and times are hard, if you'd like to support Sleepy Time Tales without having to do it financially, just tell people where to find it. If you know someone who's struggling to get a good night's sleep, let them know where they can find me, and help them get some solid rest as well. That's enough of that. I'm finishing up Nature by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and then moving into a compilation of his essays, although we don't get to any of the actual essays, mostly just the very long introduction. So let's get to it. Snuggle down, close your eyes, breathe deeply, and listen closely as I lead you down the path to sleep. Tonight, we're finishing a work and then moving on to a little other collection of stuff. But first off, Nature by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Chapter 8, Prospects. In inquiries respecting the laws of the world and the frame of things, the highest reason is always the truest. That which seems faintly possible, it is so refined, is often faint and dim because it is deepest seated in the mind among the eternal verities. Empirical science is apt to cloud the sight, and by the very knowledge of functions and processes, to bereave the student of the manly contemplation of the whole. The savant becomes unpoetic, but the best-read naturalist who lends an entire and devout attention to truth will see that there remains much to learn of his relation to the world, and that it is not to be learned by any addition or subtraction, or other comparison of known quantities, but is arrived at by untaught studies of the spirit, by continual self-recovery, and by entire humility. He will perceive that there are far more excellent qualities in the student than preciseness and infallibility, that a guess is often more fruitful than an indisputable affirmation, and that a dream may lead us deeper into the secret of nature than 100 concerted experiments. For the problems to be solved are precisely those which the physiologist and the naturalist omit to state. It is not so pertinent to man to know all the individuals of the animal kingdom, as it is to know whence and where to is this tyrannizing unity in his constitution, which evermore separates and classifies things, endeavoring to reduce the most diverse to one form. When I behold a rich landscape, it is less to my purpose to recite correctly the order and superposition of the strata, than to know why all thought of multitude is lost in a tranquil sense of unity. I cannot greatly honor minuteness in details, so long as there is no hint to explain the relation between things and thoughts, no ray upon the metaphysics of conchology, of botany, of the arts, to show the relation of the forms of flowers, shells, animals, architecture, to the mind and build science upon ideas. In a cabinet of natural history we become sensible of a certain occult recognition and sympathy in regard to the most unwieldy and eccentric forms of beast, fish, and insect. The American who has been confined, in his own country, to the sight of buildings designed after foreign models, is surprised on entering York Minster or St. Peter's at Rome by the feeling that these structures are imitations also, faint copies of an invisible archetype, Nor has science sufficient humanity, so long as the naturalist overlooks the wonderful congruity which subsists between man and the world, of which he is lord, not because he is the most subtle inhabitant, but because he is its head and heart, and finds something of himself in every great and small thing, in every mountain stratum, in every new law of color, fact of astronomy or atmospheric influence, which observation or analysis lay open. A perception of this mystery inspires the muse of George Herbert, the beautiful psalmist of the 17th century. The following lines are part of his little poem on man. Man is all symmetry, full of proportions one limb to another, and to all the world besides. Each part may call the farthest brother, for head with foot hath private amity, and both with moons and tides. Nothing hath got caught so far, but man hath caught and kept it as his prey. His eyes dismount the highest star, he is in little all the sphere. Herbs gladly cure our flesh, because that they find their acquaintance there. For us the winds do blow, the earth doth rest, heaven move and fountains flow. Nothing we see but means our good, as our delight, or as our treasure. The whole is either our cupboard of food, or cabinet of pleasure. The stars have us to bed, night draws the curtain, which the sun withdraws. Music and light attend our head. All things unto our flesh are kind, in their descent and being to our mind, in their ascent and cause. More servants wait on man than he'll notice of. In every path he treads down that which doth befriend him. When sickness makes him pale and wan, O mighty love, man is one world and hath another to attend him. The perception of this class of truths makes the attraction which draws men to science, but the end is lost sight of in attention to the means. In view of this half sight of science, we accept the sentence of Plato that poetry comes nearer to vital truth than history. Every surmise and vaticination of the mind is entitled to a certain respect, and we learn to prefer imperfect theories and sentences, which contain glimpses of truth, to digested systems which have no one valuable suggestion. A wise writer will feel that the ends of the study and composition are best answered by announcing undiscovered regions of thought, and so communicating, through hope, new activity to the torpid spirit. I shall therefore conclude this essay with some traditions of man and nature, which a certain poet sang to me, and which, as they have always been in the world, perhaps reappear to every bard, may be both in history and prophecy. The foundations of man are not in matter but in spirit, but the element of spirit is eternity. To it, therefore, the longest series of events, the oldest chronologies are young and recent. In the cycle of the universal man, from whom the known individuals proceed, centuries are points, and all history is but the epoch of one degradation. We distrust and deny inwardly our sympathy with nature. We own and disown our relation to it by turns. We are, like Nebuchadnezzar, dethroned, bereft of reason, and eating grass like an ox. But who can set limits to the remedial force of spirit? A man is a god in ruins. When men are innocent, life shall be longer, and shall pass into the immortal, as gently as we awake from dreams. Now the world would be insane and rabid if these disorganizations should last for hundreds of years. It is kept in check by death and infancy. Infancy is the perpetual Messiah, which comes into the arms of fallen men, and pleads with them to return to paradise. Man is the dwarf of himself. Once he was permeated and dissolved by spirit. He filled nature with his overflowing currents. Out from him sprang the sun and moon, from man the sun, from woman the moon. The laws of his mind, the periods of his actions externalized themselves into day and night, into the year and the seasons. But having made for himself this huge shell, his waters retired. He no longer fills the veins and veinlets, his shrunk toe drop. He sees that the structure still fits him, but fits him colossally. Say rather, once it fitted him. Now it corresponds to him from far and on high. He adores timidly his own work. Now is man the follower of the sun, and woman the follower of the moon. Yet sometimes he starts in his slumber and wonders at himself and his house, and muses strangely at the resemblance betwixt him and it. He perceives that if his law is still paramount, if he still have elemental power, if his word is sterling yet in nature, it is not conscious power. It is not inferior but superior to his will. It is instinct. Thus my Orphic poet sang. At present, man applies to nature but half his force. He works on the world with his understanding alone. He lives in it and masters it by penny wisdom, and he that works most in it is but a half man. And whilst his arms are strong and his digestion good, his mind is imbruted, and he is a selfish savage. His relation to nature, his power over it, is through the understanding, as by manure the economic use of fire, wind, water, and the mariner's needle, steam, coal, chemical agriculture, the repairs of the human body by the dentist and the surgeon. This is such a resumption of power, as if a banished king should buy his territories inch by inch, instead of vaulting at once into his throne. Meantime, in the thick darkness, there are not wanting gleams of a better light, occasional examples of the action of man upon nature with his entire force, with reason as well as understanding. Such examples are the traditions of miracles in the earliest antiquity of all nations, the history of Jesus Christ, the achievements of a principle, as in religious and political revolutions, and in the abolition of the slave trade, the miracles of enthusiasm, as those reported of Swedenborg, Hole in Hole, and the Shakers, many obscure yet contested facts, how arranged under the name of animal magnetism, prayer, eloquence, self-healing, and the wisdom of children. These are examples of reason's momentary grasp of the scepter, the exertions of a power which exists not in time or space, but an instantaneous, in-streaming, causing power. The difference between the actual and the ideal force of man is happily figured by the schoolmen in saying that the knowledge of man is an evening knowledge, vespertina cognito, but that of God is a morning knowledge, matutina cognitio. The problem of restoring to the world original and eternal beauty is solved by the redemption of the soul. The ruin or the blank that we see when we look is in our own eye. The axis of vision is not coincident with the axis of things, and so they appear not transparent but opaque. The reason why the world lacks unity and lies broken and in heaps is because man is disunited with himself. He cannot be a naturalist until he satisfies all the demands of the spirit. Love is as much its demand as perception. Indeed, neither can be perfected without the other. In the uttermost meaning of the words, thought is devout, and devotion is thought. Deep calls unto deep, but in actual life the marriage is not celebrated. There are innocent men who worship God after the tradition of their fathers, but the sense of duty has not yet extended to the use of all their faculties. And they are patient naturalists, but they freeze their subject under the wintry light of the understanding. Is not prayer also a study of truth, a sally of the soul into the unfound infinite? No man ever prayed heartily without learning something, but when a faithful thinker, resolute to detach every object from personal relations, and see it in the light of thought, shall at the same time kindle science with the fire of the holiest affections, then will God go forth anew into the creation. It will not need, when the mind is prepared for study, to search for objects. The invariable mark of wisdom is to see the miraculous in the common. What is a day? What is a year? What is summer? What is woman? What is a child? What is sleep? To our blindness, these things seem unaffecting. We make fables to hide the boldness of the fact and conform it, as we say, to the higher law of the mind. But when the fact is seen under the light of an idea, the gaudy fable fades and shrivels. We behold the real higher law. To the wise, therefore, a fact is true poetry, and the most beautiful of fables. These wonders are brought to our own door. You also are a man and woman, and their social life, poverty, labor, sleep, fear, fortune are known to you. Learn that none of these things is superficial, but that each phenomenon has its roots in the faculties and affections of the mind. Whilst the abstract question occupies your intellect, nature brings it in the concrete to be solved by your hands. It were a wise inquiry for the closet, to compare point by point, especially at remarkable crises in life, our daily history with the rise and progress of ideas in the mind. So shall we come to look at the world with new eyes. It shall answer the endless inquiry of the intellect, what is truth, and of the affections, what is good, by yielding itself passive to the educated will. Then shall come to pass what my poet said, nature is not fixed but fluid. Spirit alters, molds, makes it. The immobility or bruteness of nature is the absence of spirit. To pure spirit it is fluid, it is volatile, it is obedient. Every spirit builds itself a house, and beyond its house a world, and beyond its world a heaven. Know then that the world exists for you. For you is the phenomenon perfect. What we are, that only can we see. All that Adam had, all that Caesar could, you have and can do. Adam called his house heaven and earth. Caesar called his house Rome. You perhaps call yours a cobbler's trade, 100 acres of ploughed land, or a scholar's garret. Yet line for line and point for point your dominion is as great as theirs, though without fine names. Build therefore your own world. As fast as you conform your life to the pure idea of your mind, that will unfold its great proportions. A correspondent revolution in things will attend the influx of the spirit. So fast will disagreeable appearances, swine, spiders, snakes, pests, madhouses, prisons, enemies, vanish. They are temporary and shall be no more seen. The sordor and filths of nature, the sun shall dry up and the wind exhale. And when the summer comes from the south, the snowbanks melt, and the face of the earth becomes green before it. So shall the advancing spirit create its ornaments along its path, and carry with it the beauty it visits, and the song which enchants it. It shall draw beautiful faces, warm hearts, wise discourse, and heroic acts, around its way until evil is no more seen. The kingdom of man over nature, which cometh not with observation, a dominion such as now is beyond his dream of God. He shall enter without more wonder than the blind man who feels, who is gradually restored to perfect sight. And that's the end of Nature by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Obviously, there's still a long time to go, but I've really enjoyed reading Emerson. It's been some of my favorite stuff I've done. So I'm going to read you some of his essays. Essays by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Selected and edited with introduction and notes by Edna H. L. Turpin, author of Stories from American History, Classic Fables, Famous Painters, etc. Publisher's note: Merrill's English Texts. This series of books will include in complete editions those masterpieces of English literature that are best adapted for the use of schools and colleges. The editors of the several volumes will be chosen for their special qualifications in connection with the texts to be issued under their individual supervision. But familiarity with the practical needs of the classroom, no less than sound scholarship, will characterize the editing of every book in the series. In connection with each text, a critical and historical introduction including a sketch of the life of the author and his relation to the thought of his time, critical opinions of the work in question chosen from the great body of English criticism, and where possible, a portrait of the author will be given. Ample explanatory notes of such passages in the text as call for special attention will be supplied, but irrelevant annotation and explanations of the obvious will be rigidly excluded. Charles E. Merrill. Life of Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson was born in Boston, May 25th, 1803. He was descended from a long line of New England ministers, men of refinement and education. As a schoolboy, he was quiet and retiring, reading a great deal, but not paying much attention to his lessons. He entered Harvard at the early age of 14, but never attained a high rank there, although he took a prize for an essay on Socrates and was made his class poet after several others had declined. Next to his reserve and the faultless propriety of his conduct, his contemporaries at college seemed most impressed by the great maturity of his mind. Emerson appears never to have really been a boy. He was always serene and thoughtful, impressing all who knew him with that spirituality which was his most distinguishing characteristic. After graduating from college, he taught school for a time, and then entered the Harvard Divinity School under Dr. Channing, the great Unitarian preacher. Although he was not strong enough to attend all the lectures of the divinity course, the college authorities deemed the name Emerson sufficient passport to the ministry. He was accordingly approbated to preach by the Middlesex Association of Ministers on October 20th, 1826. As a preacher, Emerson was interesting, though not particularly original. His talent seems to have been in giving new meaning to the old truths of religion. One of his hearers has said, "In looking back on his preaching, I find he has impressed truths which I always assented in such a manner as to make them appear new, like a clearer revelation." Although his sermons were always couched in scriptural language, they were touched with the light of that genius which avoids the conventional and commonplace. In his other pastoral duties, Emerson was not quite so successful. It is characteristic of his deep humanity and his dislike for all fuss and commonplace that he appears to least advantage at a funeral. A connoisseur in such matters, an old sexton, once remarked that on such occasions he did not appear at ease at all. To tell the truth, in my opinion, that young man was not born to be a minister. Emerson did not long remain a minister. In 1832, he preached a sermon in which he announced certain views in regard to the communion service, which were disapproved by a large part of his congregation. He found it impossible to continue preaching, and with the most friendly feelings on both sides, he parted from his congregation. A few months later, he went to Europe for a short year of travel. While abroad, he visited Walter Savage Landor, Coleridge and Wordsworth, and Thomas Carlyle. This visit to Carlyle was to both men an interesting experience. They parted feeling that they had much intellectually in common. This belief fostered a sympathy which, by the time they had discovered how different they really were, had grown so strong a habit that they always kept up their intimacy. This year of travel opened Emerson's eyes to many things of which he had previously been ignorant. He had profited by detachment from the concerns of a limited community and an isolated church. After his return, he began to find his true field of activity in the lecture hall, and delivered a number of addresses in Boston and its vicinity. While thus coming before the public on the lecture platform, he was all the time preparing his treatise, which was to embody all the quintessential elements of his philosophical doctrine. This was the essay Nature, which was published in 1836. By its conception of external nature as an incarnation of the divine mind, it struck the fundamental principle of Emerson's religious belief. The essay had very small circulation at first, though later it became widely known. In the winter of 1836, Emerson followed up his discourse on nature by a course of 12 lectures on the philosophy of history, a considerable proportion of which eventually became embodied in his essays. The next year, 1837, was the year of the delivery of the Man Thinking, or the American Scholar Address, before the Phi Beta Kappa Society at Cambridge. This society, composed of the first 25 men in each class graduating from college, has annual meetings which have called forth the best efforts of many distinguished scholars and thinkers. Emerson's address was listened to with the most profound interest. It declared a sort of intellectual independence for America. Henceforth we were to be emancipated from clogging foreign influences, and a national literature was to expand under the fostering care of the Republic. These two discourses, Nature and the American Scholar, struck the keynote of Emerson's philosophical, poetical, and moral teachings. In fact, he had, as every great teacher has, only a limited number of principles and theories to teach. These principles of life can all be enumerated in 20 words: self-reliance, culture, intellectual and moral independence, the divinity of nature and man, the necessity of labor and high ideals. Emerson spent the latter part of his life in lecturing and in literary work. His son, Dr. Edward Emerson, gave an interesting account of how these lectures were constructed. All through his life he kept a journal. This book, he said, was his savings bank. The thoughts thus received and garnered in his journals were indexed, and a great many of them appeared in his published works. They were religiously set down just as they came, in no order except chronological, but later they were grouped, enlarged or pruned, illustrated, worked into a lecture or discourse, and after having in this capacity undergone repeated testing and rearranging, were finally carefully sifted and more rigidly pruned, and were printed as essays. Besides his essays and lectures, Emerson left some poetry in which is embodied those thoughts, which were to him too deep for prose expression. Oliver Wendell Holmes, in speaking of this, says, Emerson wrote occasionally in verse from his school days, until he had reached the age which used to be known as the Grand Climacteric, 63. His poems are not, and hardly can become popular. They are not meant to be liked by the many, but to be dearly loved and cherished by the few. His occasional lawlessness and technical construction, his somewhat fantastic expressions, his enigmatic obscurities hardly detract from the pleasant surprise his verses so often bring with them. The poetic license which we allow in the verse of Emerson is more than excused by the noble spirit which makes us forget its occasional blemishes, sometimes to be pleased with them as characteristic of the writer. Emerson was always a striking figure in the intellectual life of America. His discourses were above all things inspiring. Through them, many were induced to strive for a higher self of culture. His influence can be discerned in all the literary movements of the time. He was the central figure of the so-called Transcendental School, which was so prominent 50 years ago, although he always rather held aloof from any enthusiastic participation in the movement. Emerson lived a quiet life in Concord, Massachusetts. He was a first-rate neighbor, and one who always kept his fences up. He traveled extensively on his lecturing tours, even going as far as England. In English Traits, he has recorded his impressions of what he saw of English life and manners. Oliver Wendell Holmes has described him in this wise. His personal appearance was that of the typical New Englander, of college-bred ancestry. Tall, spare, slender, with sloping shoulders, slightly stooped in his later years, with light hair and eyes, the scholar's complexion, the prominent, somewhat arched nose which belongs to many of the New England subspecies, thin lips suggestive of delicacy, but having nothing like primness, still less of the rigidity which is often noticeable in the generation succeeding, next to that of the men in their shirt sleeves. He would have been noticed anywhere as one evidently a scholarly thinker, astray from the alcove or the study, which were his natural habitats. His voice was very sweet and penetrating without any loudness or mark of effort. His enunciation was beautifully clear, but he often hesitated as if waiting for the right word to present itself. His manner was very quiet. His smile was pleasant, but he did not like explosive laughter any better than Hawthorne did. None who met him can fail to recall that serene and kindly presence, in which there was mingled a certain spiritual remoteness, with the most benign and human welcome to all who were privileged to enjoy his companionship. Emerson died in April 27, 1882, after a few days' illness from pneumonia. Dr. Garnett, in his excellent biography, says, "Seldom had the reaper whose name is Death gathered such illustrious harvest as between December 1880 and April 1882. In the first month of this period, George Eliot passed away. In the ensuing February, Carlyle followed. In April, Lord Beaconsfield died, deplored by his party, nor unregretted by his country. In February of the following year, Longfellow was laid to the tomb. In April, Rossetti was laid to rest by the sea, and the pavement of Westminster Abbey was disturbed to receive the dust of Darwin. And now Emerson lay down in death beside the painter of man and the searcher of nature. The English Oriental statesman, the poet of the plain man and the poet of the artist, and the prophet whose name is indissolubly linked with his own. All these men passed into eternity laden with the toils of time, but none of them could it be said, as of Emerson, that the most shining intellectual glory and most potent intellectual force of a continent had departed along with him. Critical opinions of Emerson and his writings. Matthew Arnold, in an address on Emerson delivered in Boston, gave an excellent estimate of the rank we should accord to him in the great hierarchy of letters. Some perhaps will think that Arnold was unappreciative and cold, but dispassionate readers will be inclined to agree with his judgment about great American. After a review of the political works of Emerson, the English critic draws his conclusions as follows. I do not then place Emerson among the great poets, but I go further and say that I do not place him among the great writers, the great men of letters. Who are the great men of letters? There are men like Cicero, Plato, Bacon, Pascal, Swift, Voltaire, writers with, in the first place, a genius and instinct for style. Brilliant and powerful passages in a man's writings do not prove his possession of it. Emerson has passages of noble and pathetic eloquence. He has passages of shrewd and felicitous wit. He has crisp epigram. He has passages of exquisitely touched observation of nature. Yet he is not a great writer. Carlyle formulates perfectly the defects of his friend's poetic and literary productions when he says, "For me it is too ethereal, speculative, theoretic. I will have all things condense themselves, take shape and body if they are to have my sympathy. Not with the Miltons and Greys, not with the Platos and Spinozas, not with the Swifts and Voltaires, not with the Montaignes and Addisons can we rank Emerson. No man could see this clearer than Emerson himself." Alas, my friend, he writes in reply to Carlyle, who had exhorted him to creative work. Alas, my friend, I can do no such gay thing as you say. I do not belong to the poets, but only to a low department of literature, the reporters, suburban men. He deprecated his friend's praise. Praise generous to a fault, he calls it. Praise generous to the shaming of me, cold, fastidious, ebbing person that I am. After all this unfavorable criticism, Arnold begins to praise. Quoting passages from the essays, he adds, "This is tonic indeed, and let no one object that it is too general. That more practical, positive direction is what we want. Yes, truly his sight is admirable, his truth is precious. Yet the secret of his effect is not even in these, it is in his temper. It is in the hopeful, serene, beautiful temper wherewith these, in Emerson, are indissolubly united. in which they work and have their being. One can scarcely overrate the importance of holding fast to happiness and hope. It gives to Emerson's work an invaluable virtue. As Wordsworth poetry is, in my judgment, the most important done in verse, in our language during the present century, so Emerson's essays are, I think, the most important work done in prose. But by his conviction that in the life of the spirit is happiness, and by his hope that this life of the spirit will come more and more to be sanely understood, and to prevail, and to work for happiness, by this conviction and hope Emerson was great. And he will surely prove, in the end, to have been right in them. You cannot prize him too much, nor heed him too diligently. Hermann Grimm, a German critic of great influence in his own country, did much to obtain a hearing for Emerson's works in Germany. At first the Germans could not understand the unusual English, the unaccustomed turns of phrase which are so characteristic of Emerson's style. Macaulay gives them no difficulty. Even Carlyle is comprehended. But in Emerson's writings, the broad turnpike is suddenly changed into a hazardous, sandy footpath. His thoughts and his style are American. He is not writing for Berlin, but for the people of Massachusetts. It is an art to rise above what we have been taught. All great men are seen to possess this freedom. They derive their standard from their own natures, and their observations on life are so natural and spontaneous that it would seem as if the most illiterate person with a scrap of common sense would have made the same. We become wiser with them, and know not how the difficult appears easy and the involved plain. Emerson possesses this noble manner of communicating himself. He inspires me with courage and confidence. He has read and seen, but conceals the labor. I meet in his works plenty of familiar facts, but he does not employ them to figure up anew the old worn-out problems. Each stands on a new spot and serves for new combinations. From everything he sees the direct line issuing which connects it with the focus of life. Emerson's theory is that of the sovereignty of the individual, to discover what a young man is good for, and to equip him for the path he is to strike out in life, regardless of any other consideration. It is the great duty to which he calls attention. He makes men self-reliant. He reveals to the eyes of the idealist the magnificent results of practical activity, and unfolds before the realist the grandeur of the ideal world of thought. No man is to allow himself, through prejudice, to make a mistake in choosing the task to which he will devote his life. Emerson's essays are, as it were, printed sermons, all having the same text. The wealth and harmony of his language overpowered and entranced me anew, but even now I cannot say wherein the secret of his influence lies. What he has written is like life itself, the unbroken thread ever lengthened through addition of small events which make up each day's experience. Okay, halfway through reading the criticisms of Emerson, I'm going to be calling it a day. As always, you can find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use, so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night, and sweet dreams.